This is John Groves coming to you from my home studio. Our Bible talk for today comes to us from the last chapter in the first book of Samuel. I want to discuss the death of King Saul, the first king of Israel. Saul struggled in his efforts to lead his people. His successor David, who was also his son-in-law and a very good friend of his son Jonathan, simply overshadows him, even displaces him in our public consciousness. But rather than discuss Saul's achievements and failures, I would like to discuss what essentially became his final moments and invite us to consider what represents a life well lived. Saul was a man who became very jealous of David. The people often sang a ditty to which he took offense. They sang, "Saul has slain his thousands and David his 10,000s." The prophet Samuel anointed both men to be kings of Israel, and for a considerable period of time, they were rivals for popular support. As an attendant in Saul's royal court, David played the harp and sang songs to soothe the troubled mind of King Saul. And Saul attempted numerous times to eliminate David, only to see him escape. At one point, David even sought refuge with Saul's enemies and became a brigand, living off their spoils. Saul did his best defending the people of Israel against their enemies, principally the Philistines. But during the Battle of Gilboa, Saul's sons were slain in the fight, and Saul saw his troops run from the Philistines in defeat. The Bible tells us that Saul, who suffered injuries from the enemy archers, instructed his armor-bearer to run him through with his sword, something the attendant refused to do. So Saul fell on his sword and died. The Philistines recovered his corpse, cut off his head, stripped off his armor, and conveyed the news to all the surrounding communities. The Philistines placed Saul's armor in one of their temples, and his body and that of his sons were displayed on a wall in a nearby Philistine city. It is very likely that if Saul had been captured alive, he would have been made a living public spectacle in the ongoing effort to subjugate his people. Valiant men from Saul's tribe traveled all night and recovered the bodies, burned them, and buried them in Jabesh under a tamarisk tree, and fasted 7 days. We tend to regard suicide as a coward's way out of life's problems. But Japanese fighting men, the feared samurai, practice seppuku, sometimes referred to as harakiri, a ritualized form of suicide meant to clear the victim of any dishonor. In Saul's case, the valor of the men who recovered his body and those of his sons speaks to the respect they had for them. These men were willing to lose their lives to spare Saul's family and the Israelites from any further dishonor. Imagine fasting for 7 days as a manifestation of respect for the deceased. There are many lessons to pursue in this story. We will be coming back to some of them next time. Thank you.